voice. On behalf of Veterans for Trump and Veterans for America First, I'm proud to announce the endorsement of John Myrick, who's running for U.S. Senate to represent the state of Maryland. So, John, I want you to tell the voters of Maryland a little bit about yourself, what got you into politics in the first place.
Well, thank you very much, sir. First off, I want to tell the people of Maryland, I am not a politician. I am a public servant. I've served the people of Maryland and the United States for the past 40 years, my entire adult life. I started out as a Harford County, Maryland Sheriff's deputy. So I'm the only United States Senate candidate for Maryland, Democrat or Republican, who's ever worn a badge and who understands what it's like to have to protect people at night in their homes. I served 23 years in the Air Force Reserve. I'm a highly decorated combat veteran. I've spent 30 years in the United States intelligence community as a senior intelligence officer for a variety of organizations throughout the government. I've lectured on national security policy at universities throughout the country. I'm considered an expert by the U.S. government on national security policy and on asymmetric threats. I've briefed Congress hundreds of times. I've testified before committees. I've briefed NATO and allied leaders. I've briefed at the White House. So I've gotten a chance to see how the system works from the inside without ever having been elected to an office. I've never served in a public capacity at all. I got into the race simply because I was fed up, like most Americans, with career politicians. They are not there and not interested in solving problems. That's clear. They're interested in telling you who's to blame for their problems and on maintaining their own positions in power. They forgot long ago who they actually are supposed to serve. And good people can no longer sit by the sidelines and do nothing and expect things to change. So I decided that it was time to stand up and actually take a position and try to make that change.
You were sick and tired of being sick and tired, as we say in the South.
Absolutely, sir.
And jumping off the sidelines, one thing that we see is a lot of concerned citizens joining the political world. And we're getting a refreshing back to the simplest of what we should be, instead of the barter game of favors. But one thing that I'm seeing in some criticisms is the lack of knowledge of how the system works. And it sounds like from your history working in government as a public servant to some degree for the past 40 years, you don't need a lot of on-the-job training. If you're already in the trenches, for lack of a better phrase, you can go and not have to be told how to operate by the deep state or by the unelected, faceless officials that are there. So I appreciate you doing that, because the America First agenda is pretty simple. It's about individual liberty, the right for the individual to pursue happiness and to have a country to share with our children.
Yes, sir.
So when you get to the U.S. Senate, what is the most important thing or things that you hope to achieve when you're there?
Well, clearly there are a lot of issues that are facing America that need immediate attention, obviously. And let me say that I am willing to work with anyone, regardless of their political affiliation or their political party, if they have solutions that make sense and that will help solve problems for America. One of the biggest problems, obviously, nowadays is border security. I think that's paramount on everybody's mind. Hearing, listening to the Secretary of Homeland Security and the Director of the FBI, almost 10 million illegal aliens have crossed our border in the past 3 years. And I'd like to remind Marylanders that that's 1.5 times the entire population of the state of Maryland.
Right.
1.5 times. And out of those 10 million, nearly 2 million of them are what they call gotaways. That's people who've had no contact whatsoever with any federal law enforcement officer. We have no idea who those people are. But what we do know is out of the 8 million that they have had contact with, they've arrested over 400 who are on terrorist watch lists. We know that nearly 27,000 military-age single Chinese males have entered the southern border, across the southern border in the past 3 years. The last time I checked, Chinese weren't indigenous to Mexico. So there's got to be a reason for that as well. And those people are creating a national security threat here, not just from a potential terrorism standpoint, and criminal standpoint, as we're seeing every day, and here in Maryland as well, but also from an economic standpoint. The sanctuary cities that these people are settling in are undergoing tremendous financial burdens that's winding up on the backs of the American taxpayers. And that's unfair. Those resources are being siphoned away from American citizens for people who violate our laws. And that has to stop. Other than that, I mean, I want to see the economy fixed, obviously. We've seen major problems out of the policies that have come out of the Biden administration in the past 3 years on economic policies. Things like the Inflation Reduction Act, which did anything but reduce inflation. We're seeing unprecedented levels of inflation now, and I blame those bad policies and even worse legislation that's come out of the House and the Senate on economic matters in the past 3 years. I want to take a look at those things and repeal the legislation that doesn't make sense and is not good for the economy. And I want to make sure that Maryland products and services are also included in the future in any economic policy or any economic packages that are put forth before the Senate. Maryland has a lot to offer, everything from agriculture to industry to services. And we need to make sure that Maryland is also included in those budgetary issues as well. The other issue that I really am championing is term limits for Congress. 87% of the American people, according to a poll in September of 2023, want term limits for Congress. I can't get 9 out of 10 Marylanders to go outside, look up, and decide and agree that the sky is blue. But 9 out of 10 Americans want term limits for Congress. So I will propose legislation to have a constitutional amendment that enacts a 12-year term limit total for United States Congress. That's either 2 terms in the Senate, 6 terms in the House, or any combination thereof. Our founding fathers never envisioned politics as a career. They understood that you needed to change that representation from time to time. So I'm going to make that happen there. And I know people on the House side who also agree with that and are willing to sponsor legislation there as well. So we're going to work to do that. And of course, protecting our rights. You see this every day. You know, the government used to have the common decency not to tell us when they were violating our rights, like back in the 60s when they were doing wiretaps. We didn't find out about that until the late 70s. Now they do that right in your face and dare you to do anything about it. Everything from investigating parents as domestic terrorists for having the temerity to actually go to a school board meeting and argue about what's being taught to their children, to your credit card purchases being flagged based on testimony from the Secretary of Treasury a couple of months ago, being flagged if you buy sporting goods and religious texts. So if you buy a pair of tennis shoes from Dick's Sporting Goods and a Quran, a Bible, or a Torah, your purchases are flagged and sent to the Department of Justice for further investigation. No warrant, no probable cause, a clear violation of your Fourth Amendment rights and your First Amendment rights. And now we have the Department of Defense, the National Security Agency, last month testified before Congress that they've been using your tax money to buy your internet browsing histories from a third-party vendor so they can see what websites you've been looking at. So they will determine whether or not they're going to refer those over to the Justice Department for terrorist investigations. Again, no warrant, no probable cause, clear violations of your rights. That has to stop. And I will see that stop as a U.S. Senator.
Well, I think you've got your head on your shoulders about all of those issues. I've personally been to the border. I was on the Mexican side of the border between the cartels and the Mexican National Guard back in November. I don't believe we saw any illegal Mexicans coming across the border. We saw them from all over the world. So you're correct, it's a national security issue. It's a crime issue. And when sanctuary cities are asking for federal bailout money, well, that money is coming right out of the hands of our U.S. citizens and being funneled to the beneficiaries in the sanctuary cities, who are the illegal aliens, at the expense of those who are not getting resources to their own communities. So Every state's a border state. Our economy is also a national security issue. Energy independence, I believe, is right in the middle of that. So
Absolutely.
I want all the voters in Maryland to learn more about you, what you're going to do, and how would they go about learning more about you in the race?
Well, I would encourage them to visit my website, which is johnmyrickforsenate.org. On the website, there is a tab that says Advocating for Marylanders. And each of my positions for all of the issues facing America now are detailed there in excruciatingly painful detail. So they'll be able to research it. There's also a button on there for contact us. They can comment, they can ask questions, and all of those comments are answered by me, not by my campaign staff. I answer every one of those comments. They can call me. The phone number on my website is my personal cell phone, because I feel that if you are, as a constituent, if you're going to take the time to call your United States senator, you deserve to speak with your United States senator. So I answer every one of those calls, and I will talk to anyone about anything.
And on that same website, they can volunteer, help with your campaign, knock on some doors, donate some money, and find out when they should vote. And I understand you've already had some absentee ballots that have been mailed out, but when does early voting and when is the final date of election for the primary, at least, in your state?
Right, early voting here in Maryland begins on May 2nd, and the actual primary is May 14th. And as you mentioned, mail-in ballots have already been sent out. My understanding from the State Board of Elections is about 600,000 mail-in ballots were sent out on the 1st of April. So they're already out there in play. I would again encourage people who receive mail-in ballots to at least do your homework. Know who you're voting for, know what their positions are, make sure they align with your own personal positions. I would love to tell people that I don't care who they vote for just to vote. But in the Senate race here in Maryland, obviously, I have a vested interest. So I would prefer their vote. I'm asking for their vote. But as long as they make a vote from an informed decision, that's all I can ask for as an American citizen.
Well, thank you for stepping up. Thank you for being a continual public servant and looking out after the American way. Because if we don't preserve our nation, our children will not know what it is. The America First agenda and the America First candidates are going to save this country. And we welcome you into the fold. And I will ask every voter in Maryland to vote for John A. Myrick for U.S. Senate in 2024.